On June 7th, Dark Phoenix, or X-Men Dark Phoenix as it is still called in many international territories, premiered. The movie, which has been subjected to extensive reshoots and has had its release date pushed back several times, marks the final chapter of Fox's X-Men franchise. However, there was hardly any advance hype. The film has been savaged by critics and fans alike and has tanked at the box office. So badly that it may ultimately lose the studio more than $100 million. Dark Phoenix is indeed a sorry end for the, at times, great X-Men franchise. If we were to be honest, there were quite a few subpar films in it already. It also could never keep its continuity straight for more than 2 consecutive movies. In this Postmortem retrospective, we will explore not just how Dark Phoenix could end up this badly, but how the entire franchise could go back and forth between greatness and utter mediocrity. To do that, we will go back to the beginnings of the franchise and briefly explore each movie in it, what made them either work or fail, to see how it all culminated into Dark Phoenix, and what the future may hold at Disney. Created by writer and Marvel editor-in-chief Stan Lee and co-writer and artist Jack Kirby in 1963, the X-Men would transition through numerous character lineups and creative teams in the decades to follow. Since the 1980s, they were consistently among Marvel's best-selling comics. They've been featured in numerous video games across multiple platforms, and the 1990s animated series, which is now considered a classic. While there had been attempts at making an X-Men movie since 1984, first by Orion Pictures and later under Carolco, then with Bob Hoskins of Who Framed Roger Rabbit attached to star as Wolverine, nothing would come of it. In 1994, impressed by the success of the animated series, producer Lawrence Schuler Donner procured the X-Men movie rights from Marvel on behalf of Fox. Brett Ratner, Robert Rodriguez, and Paul W.S. Anderson were all prospective directors at one point or another. However, by December of 1996, and much at the behest of producer Tom DeSanto, Bryan Singer was the one who in the end was signed to direct. The themes of prejudice in the comic resonated with Singer, who took the material very seriously. The script, developed under Singer and DeSanto, drew Martin Luther King and Malcolm X parallels between Xavier and Magneto, and made Rogue an important character because of her mutation, which renders her unable to touch anyone, symbolic of isolation and alienation. Magneto's plot to mutate the world's leaders into accepting mutants was inspired by how Constantine I converted to Christianity and ended the persecution of early Christians in the Roman Empire. The analogy was emphasized in a deleted scene in which Storm teaches history. Furthermore, Senator Kelly's claim that he had a list of mutants living in the United States recalled Senator Joseph McCarthy's similar claim regarding communists. The same care that went into breaking down the script went into casting, with Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen providing the required gravitas as Xavier and Magneto respectively. For the point of view character, the fan favorite Wolverine, Singer knew who he wanted from day one, Russell Crowe. However, Crowe made it equally clear from the onset that he wasn't interested. Crowe had just starred in Gladiator and did not want to be typecast. Crowe did, however, recommend that Singer at the very least audition his friend Hugh Jackman. Singer did that and had Jackman audition for the role alongside several other actors. After several rounds of auditions, Singer found his Wolverine, Scottish actor Dougray Scott. With the rest of the cast falling into place, production began on X-Men in September of 1999 for a Christmas 2000 release. Dougray Scott, however, was also in Mission Impossible 2, a movie which should have been done filming by the time X-Men began production. Mission Impossible 2 was behind schedule and in need of reshoots, and Paramount had the priority claim on him. Fox shifted around the X-Men filming schedule to accommodate for Scott's absence caused by Mission Impossible's scheduling conflict, hoping against hope that Scott would be released on time to film his scenes as Wolverine as rescheduled. He wasn't. As such, Singer was forced to recast, and the runner-up from the auditions, Hugh Jackman, came on board when the movie was already weeks into production. There were more issues behind the scenes. Then Fox head honcho Tom Rothman reportedly did not have much faith in the movie. Rothman had already cut the movie's budget several times during pre-production, and in what Ain't It Cool News would later describe as an effort to rid himself of what he considered a corporate albatross, Rothman moved the film's release date up from Christmas of 2000 to summer of 2000. Singer was able to accommodate this, and on July 14th of 2000, a mere 4 months after filming had wrapped, X-Men was released, to rave reviews and to a $54 million opening weekend. The movie would go on to gross $296 million worldwide against a budget of $75 million. Alongside Sony's Spider-Man 2 years later, X-Men would herald the comic book movie boom, which continues unabated to this day. A sequel was inevitable. Due to the success of the previous movie, Singer was able to muster greater control and a higher budget for the sequel, which story-wise was influenced by the Marvel Comics storylines Return to Weapon X and God Loves, Man Kills. This paid off as the movie opened to an $85 million opening weekend and went on to gross $407 million worldwide against a budget of $110 million. It was and is still considered to be one of the greatest comic book movies of all time. According to Ain't It Cool News, however, this must have stuck in Tom Rothman's craw something fierce. Instead of renewing Singer for X-Men 3, Rothman strung him along for a long time, long enough that Warner Brothers lured him away to do Superman Returns instead, taking his X2 screenwriters Dan Harris and Michael Dougherty with him. The Dark Phoenix storyline teased at the end of X2 would have to be tackled by another creative team. In February of 2005, with no director hired, Fox saw fit to announce a May 5, 2006 release date, with filming to start in July of 2005. In other words, they were telling prospective directors they only had a couple of months to make the script the studio was prepping for them to work, come up with everything else, and have it ready to be filmed. A number of directors approached turned down this most gracious offering. The release date was pushed back 3 weeks to May 26th of 2006. After Matthew Vaughn did some early work, Brett Ratner signed on to direct. Ratner didn't know the first thing about the X-Men mythos, so he trusted the writer the studio had attached to get that part right. That writer was Simon Kinberg. Kinberg had previously written both the Fantastic Four and Elektra for Fox, and on X3 he was working alongside Zach Penn. How X-Men 3 in the end turned out isn't just his fault though. The story was comprised of both Dark Phoenix and a cure for being a mutant. Of the two, it was the studio, i.e. Tom Rothman, that pushed for more of the cure, as was felt the Dark Phoenix story was too mature for the audience. Kinberg and Penn actually had to fight to keep much of the Dark Phoenix content in the final movie as possible. Brett Ratner got the movie released on time, and due to the success of the previous two movies, X-Men 3 would go on to become the most financially successful X-Men movie up till then, grossing $459 million worldwide. The audience, however, did not respond to this movie as they had the previous two, and that would be felt by the later sequels, or rather, later prequels. Future Game of Thrones writer David Benioff had been pushing for a Wolverine solo movie for years before finally being enlisted to write one. In the film, we learned that rather than always having been a badass we came to know in Singer's X-Men movies, the pre-memory loss Logan was something of a wuss, always showing restraint, spending decades telling Sabretooth enough, and to slow it down a couple of notches. We also learned that the adamantium bonding procedure wasn't nearly as bad as the flashbacks from Singer's movies would suggest. Benioff may have forgotten about those.
While Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and Euron's forces, they certainly haven't forgotten about her.
We also learned that the name Wolverine comes from a supposed Native American legend about a spirit named Keikoatsu who fell in love with the moon and was rejected by her. The movie, however, can't entirely be blamed on Benioff. Star Hugh Jackman served as producer on the movie and approved everything, while director Gavin Hood and Fox CEO Tom Rothman were all but in open conflict. Hood wanted a serious tone for the movie. Rothman wanted something bright and flashy to wow the kids he valued as the built-in audience. There are rumors that Rothman even repainted the sets while Hood was away to make everything brighter, and that a large chunk of the finished movie was actually ghost-directed by Richard Donner, husband of producer Lawrence Schuler Donner, and the decision to sew Deadpool's mouth shut was reportedly made by Tom Rothman. The movie grossed $373 million worldwide against a budget of $150 million that the studio will admit to. The actual cost is rumored to be much higher due to extensive reshoots. In any event, X-Men Origins Wolverine was the least profitable X-Men movie for the studio up until then, bar none. It was so unsuccessful that Fox scrapped future X-Men Origins movies. Magneto was the next film in line. It was instead merged into the next movie. The prequel X-Men First Class saw both Bryan Singer and Simon Kinberg return to the franchise, but as producers. Kick-Ass director Matthew Vaughn, once briefly attached to X-Men 3, would direct the script by Ashley Edward Miller. The first cut was reportedly a mess, and the movie required 5 weeks worth of reshoots. There are persistent rumors that Bryan Singer ghost-directed the reshoots, or at the very least, parts of them. Whatever the truth was, the final movie gave the franchise a much-needed fuel injection, For the first time since X-Men 2, audiences responded well to the movie. The younger cast, most notably James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender, were embraced as the recast Xavier and Magneto. In no small part due to the disappointing previous 2 installments, First Class would only gross $353 million against a budget of $160 million. It would be followed by another Wolverine solo movie. James Mangold's The Wolverine was the first movie to actually move the franchise forward in time, as it took place after the events of X-Men 3: The Last Stand. The movie represented another return to form, in that it had a thematic profundity not seen since the Singer-directed movies. It did suffer some issues in the third act, which led to some mixed reviews, but it did serve towards generating more excitement and goodwill towards the next installment. The now recast X-Men franchise was hamstrung by 2 notoriously unpopular movies in particular, namely X-Men 3: The Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine. As such, the decision was made to wipe them from continuity in the adaptation of the seminal storyline Days of Future Past. That both X-Men 1 and 2, as well as the Wolverine, would be wiped out as well, wasn't said out loud with as much fervor. However, this did serve to give the new cast a clean slate in their movies going forward. Bryan Singer would return to the director's chair, while Simon Kinberg would both write the script and produce. For those keeping score, Tom Rothman had by this time been fired from Fox and could do no further damage. The movie, with both the new and old cast united, was a smash hit, grossing $747 million against a budget of $200 million. Days of Future Past left the franchise in a very healthy state. Outside of Deadpool, which is so much of its own thing that it won't be touched upon in this video, the franchise would not remain vibrant for long. Bryan Singer would return to direct and Simon Kinberg would return to produce X-Men Apocalypse, presumably with greater powers than before, as longtime producer Lauren Schuler Donner by this time was no longer involved behind the scenes. However, Singer and Kinberg were not able to recapture the lightning in a bottle they had caught with the previous movie. Something was off with Apocalypse. For one thing, Apocalypse himself did not work. While the intention no doubt was for actor Oscar Isaac's Apocalypse to stand out from the CGI animated Thanos and Hulk with a presence no animation could hope to emulate, one of the biggest takeaways from the movie was that sometimes CGI is preferable to latex and makeup. The movie grossed only $543 million worldwide, $200 million less than the previous film. With Logan, James Mangold finished what he started in The Wolverine. The movie marks Hugh Jackman's last stint as Wolverine, Patrick Stewart's final appearance as Xavier, and is chronologically the final X-Men movie, and according to many, is the absolute finest in the series. It served to illustrate just how vital an R rating can be for comic book movies when put into proper use. Logan grossed $619 million against a budget of just $97 million. It would have probably been better to end the franchise there. Both Simon Kinberg and Zach Penn were unhappy with how X-Men 3: The Last Stand turned out. So when Days of Future Past put another Dark Phoenix adaptation on the table, Simon Kinberg went for it. The storyline was already set up in Apocalypse, a movie so disappointing with critics and at the box office that Bryan Singer would not return to direct the next installment. Due to his recent and personal issues, he would also not receive credit for behind-the-scenes contributions there might have been, if any. Instead, Dark Phoenix was Simon Kinberg's baby. In addition to writing and producing, Dark Phoenix would mark his directorial debut. At least, officially. For those who are familiar with Midnight's Edge, you'll remember the rumors that Simon Kinberg was the one who both mandated and ghost-directed the extensive reshoots required on Josh Trank's Fantastic Four, as Trank himself was reportedly either unwilling or due to other circumstances, unable to do it himself. In any event, like Trank's Fantastic Four, Simon Kinberg's original cut of X-Men Dark Phoenix had issues and was in need of reshoots. The entire third act had to be completely overhauled. Due to the reshoots, the movie was pushed back several times. In the midst of all this, Fox was acquired by Disney. This ended Kinberg's plans of continuing the franchise, as Disney made it clear that Dark Phoenix would be the last, before the series would be rebooted down the line within the MCU. More likely than not, removing X-Men from the title and just calling the movie Dark Phoenix may have been Disney's decision as well. Kinberg found a tacit way of expressing his feelings on the matter. The reshoots included the scene where the X-Men are held captive on a train. The soldiers guarding them are from a special ops unit called the MCU. Dark Phoenix took in an estimated $33 million at the US box office over the course of its domestic opening weekend, which is by far the lowest opening in the history of the franchise, even unadjusted for inflation. Adding insult to injury, Lauren Schuler Donner, the producer who initially acquired the X-Men for Fox, publicly distanced herself not just from Dark Phoenix, but the entire direction the series has taken since Apocalypse, by making it known she had no involvement since then or with the yet-to-be-released New Mutants. We will cover New Mutants at a greater length in an upcoming video. With such an opening weekend, Dark Phoenix is unlikely to even cross the $100 million threshold at the domestic box office by the end of its run, and it may struggle to reach $300 million worldwide, as the film is not faring better overseas. Analysts are already predicting the movie may lose between $100 and $120 million after all revenue streams have been accounted for. The decline from the previous movie is a global one. Three possible reasons for this decline stand out. First among them, Days of Future Past was released 5 years ago. The goodwill from that film is long gone, especially after the release of Apocalypse. The goodwill from Deadpool and Logan, neither of which Kinberg were involved with by the way, did not translate to this. Furthermore, it has been well known for a year that Disney had acquired Fox and reacquired the X-Men in the process. A reboot of the X-Men within the MCU is a prospect audiences are excited about. So much so that rather than a worthy send-off, something most had already got in Logan, this movie comes across more like an obstacle on the road to the reboot more than anything else. Finally, there are the reviews, which have been brutal. At the time of making this video, the movie has a 23% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which is the lowest in the history of the franchise. Many are of the opinion that the film seems excessive. While the movie is widely considered to be boring and uninteresting, and therefore feels way too long, both The Last Stand and Wolverine Origins are arguably much worse movies, and are more deserving of this level of scorn than Dark Phoenix is. Many feel it doesn't quite deserve being ganged up on by critics in quite this way. So why is it? Is this not a Disney movie? Do they not protect their movies from such a beating by critics under threat of revoking access? Apparently not in this case. While Disney are the ones that take the short-term loss on it, the movie was made by the now defunct Marvel operation at Fox, meaning all blame will be pointed there. Simon Kinberg will not be getting many other offers to direct after this, and for Sophie Turner, this will be the last thing her career needed following the end of Game of Thrones. Despite being the ones left with the loss, Disney may come out on top of this yet. The response to Dark Phoenix may make their own eventual reboot shine all the more by comparison down the line. Prior to Disney taking over, Fox have released X-Men movies for nearly 2 decades. On the whole, they have been a very mixed bag. How could they range between extremes like X2 and Days of Future Past on one end, and Wolverine Origins and The Last Stand on the other? The thing to keep in mind is that in heralding the modern comic book movie era, X-Men predated it. As such, the movie was made in the traditional way, meaning there were no solid plans for a franchise beyond one movie, and perhaps some loose ideas for the next one. The original 2 X-Men movies were fortunate having producer Tom DeSanto and director Bryan Singer guiding them, as they were the right fits. Even Bryan Singer and his writers only had the vaguest of outlines for the 3rd movie. If Singer had ended up directing it, we had no way of knowing how it would have turned out. What we do know is that with the 3rd movie, then Fox CEO Tom Rothman started micromanaging the series. This resulted in X-Men 3 The Last Stand and X-Men Origins Wolverine. 2 movies so bad that after Rothman had been ousted and Singer returned to the franchise, a whole movie was dedicated to undoing the damage Rothman had wrought on the series. When Singer returned, so did Simon Kinberg, both as writer and producer. Kinberg was increasingly exerting more influence, to the point where he wrote, produced, and directed the final installment of the franchise. He had no involvement, however, with either Deadpool or Logan, arguably the most successful Fox movies made during his tenure as producer on the X-Men series. This suggests Kinberg was never a good fit for the property as Bryan Singer or Tom DeSanto were back in the franchise's early stages. If there is one lesson to be learned from looking back at the X-Men film franchise, it is the importance of having a long-term plan, and at any time having the right people who best fit the material and are able to execute it. Whenever that has been the case with the X-Men, the movies have excelled because of it. The X-Men are now back at Disney, and are theirs to either soar to new heights or plunge into the abyss. At this point, we do not know what they will do, other than Marvel Studios' Victoria Alonso already expressing some thoughts in line with what Mystique already expressed on screen in Dark Phoenix. Although this might be one producer's opinion or testing the waters, rather than being indicative of any actual plans. That, at least, is what many are hoping. What do you think they will do, and what did you think about Dark Phoenix? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, why not subscribe and click the bell icon for all the latest content? And be sure to check out our other videos. And if you really like the channel, why not consider supporting us on Patreon? Patreon supporters get all kinds of bonus exclusives, and you can support the channel for as little as $1 a month. You can also check out our sister channel, Midnight's Edge After Dark, for live streams, discussions, and more. Stay tuned because another video is coming right up.